In this video, I'm going to go through in detail on how to remove, replace, and adjust the power steering control valve for your C3 Corvette. So the weather's going to be getting nice in a week or so, I'm going to get the 70 Corvette uncovered and fired up and out of the garage. The first thing I noticed though, it did leak some power steering fluid, so it looks like the power steering rack is starting to leak. So let's peel back the cover and get her fired up. Sitting since December and it's mid-April right now, so fuel pump prime up a little bit. And unfortunately, you can see it looks like we got about an inch of snow today, even though the weather is going to be nice in a week from now. You can hear the power steering pump. Alright, got the vet in the garage, and you can see this afternoon we got about an inch and a half worth of snow, so kind of sucks. But nonetheless, it's going to be 65, 70 degrees in a couple days, so this will melt off quick, and we should have some nice weather for cruising coming up here. So we're going to get the vet up on jack stands, and let's take a look at this power steering rack seal, see if we can't get that fixed. Car's in the air now, jack stands underneath it. Going to pull off the center cap, lug nuts off, and tire out of the way. Also cut it all the way over to the right so we can get a better look at what's going on. And you can see right here that the power steering control valve is leaking from the seal. I did pop the cap off it so we can get a better look too, but there's supposed to be a cap over the top of this, but that's where it's leaking from. I did some research and I was going to buy a rebuild kit for it, but unfortunately the rebuild kit shipping was 34 days out, and I want to drive the car over the weekend, 2 days away, so I'm not waiting 34 days for the seal kit. So I did look around and found a new one. Unfortunately, the new one was $196, but I think this thing's 50 years old. It's been rebuilt once, so it's probably time to replace it anyway. The other thing I want to do while I have this taken apart is I want to replace the extend and retract power steering lines. You can see here at the top of the screen, the extend line has been rubbing against the bracket for the power steering cylinder right there, so that's been chafing the line pretty good. It's about ready to break through, so for safety reasons I definitely want to replace that. The other thing I noticed that when I put this line on, I routed it incorrectly, so when I reinstall it I'll show you how I reroute these things so they don't do that again. So that's something you want to be careful of if you're going to do this. Make sure you do route those correctly. So first off, we're going to remove the extend and retract hoses. The top one is the extend. It has a little bit tighter loop. The bottom one is the retract, has a little bit bigger loop. So we're gonna get these guys out of the way. I would definitely recommend using a good line wrench to remove these, because if you don't, you start rounding these things off and they're just gonna be a bear to take off. So definitely recommend investing in a good set of line wrenches to remove these. Both these hoses are 7/16 on both ends. Put a drip pan underneath too, like I did. Catch some of the fluid, avoid making a big stinking mess. With a good wrench, they should come loose pretty easy for you. And again, these are 7/16. Easy to get at, they're right on the outside. Break them loose and you should be able to take them off with your finger. They'll come right out. All right, the next thing we're gonna do on the lower side is remove the extend line. That's gonna be the one on the bottom, and that's gonna have the smaller loop. Yep, and there goes my freaking camera. I did get it broken free though. More start to make a mess. Alright, extend line out of the way. Okay, next up we're going to remove the high pressure line from the power steering control valve. This is going to be the smaller line coming out of the power steering pump. Break that loose. There we go. High pressure line's out. Now we will break free the return line. The return line is a 5/8. Break that free. Once that's broke free, should unscrew pretty easily by hand. Get that one out of the way. All right, now we got all the lines off. The next thing we'll do is take this castle nut off. There's a cotter pin in here. We'll get the pin out of the way, and then we'll get the pitman arm off of it. Sometimes these cotter pins can be really tough to get out. What I'll typically do is spray them good with some PB Blaster. Really good at a drip pan underneath, so I'll just let it run all over the place. And then get this cotter pin pulled back. These cotter pins can be really hard to get out. You get all kinds of crud and stuff on top of them, and they can be a bear to get out. But all right, I just tapped that one back with a hammer, got a pair of vice grips on it, and slid that one out no problem. That one wasn't rusted in too badly at all. Okay, the castle nut's a 3/4 inch, so you can get a socket up in here as long as it's a short one and break that free. The one thing to note here is I did have to put the steering wheel back in the center position. If it's all the way over, if the car is turned all the way to the right, or if the cylinder is extended all the way out, you're going to get pinched in the frame rail and you won't be able to get a socket on there. So, yeah, you can see where I slid it over, and it's going to pinch my wrench in there where I'm not going to be able to get this out. So I'm going to have to recenter that and squirt fluid all over me. That was pretty cool. It almost didn't taste good. So got to give you enough room to get your wrench in and out. Again, if that gets all the way in the extended position, you're not going to get your socket wrench off of it. You want to unscrew it almost all the way to the top. You want to leave that on there. So, all right, the next thing you want to do is take your fork, slide it between the control valve and the pitman arm, and then don't be afraid to take a good whack at it, because it's going to take a little bit to. There we go. There we go. Like I said, it's going to take a few good whacks, so don't be afraid to hit that pretty hard to get it to break free. Okay, so next I'm going to remove this 9/16 bolt that connects the power steering control valve to the drag link, or I think most people refer it to as a relay rod now. This back here, so it's mounted right through here. I'm going to break this free, get it out of the way. I'm actually going to take this bolt all the way out so I can get a screwdriver in here to pry the clamp apart a little bit, make it a little easier to take. All right, next up, just to make it easier to take the control valve off the drag link or relay rod, what I'm going to do is, I have an old screwdriver that I use for this. I'm just going to stick that in there, give that a couple hits, spread that out a little bit. All right, so the easiest way to get these off is once you spread this out a little bit, it should get loose, and you just turn that counterclockwise and it should just unthread right off of there. Now a lot of times these things can be pretty crusted up, so you definitely want to PB blast them really good, and unless you separate this a little bit, they are just not going to cooperate and come off. So unthread that and you are free. All right, a couple things to note on the new power steering control valve is, one, the new one or the rebuilt one or remanufactured one did not come with a bolt that clamps down on the drag link, or the, you want to call it drag link or relay bar. It didn't come with a new bolt, so I did use my old bolt. Do a good job wire wheeling these and clean them up, because the last thing you want to do is crud up these threads or cross thread something. So definitely either buy a new bolt or clean up your old one before you reuse it. The other thing too is castle nut, reusing that also. One thing to note is clean these up real good, get all the schmutz out of the threads. I used a battery terminal brush, stick it in there, clean up the threads, works fantastic, you know. But you definitely want to make sure that's clean, because you don't want to go cross threading or anything like that when you're putting new stuff on. But I'm just going to take the power steering control valve apart real quick so you can take a look at it and see what's inside. So the interesting thing about this is when I did rebuild this 7 years ago, I rebuilt it probably about 6 times, and it leaked every time I put it back together again. And I was having a lot of trouble trying to get the proportioning correct. So at the time, my daughter, which is really into cars, she was only 14 at the time. She had come out, took a look at the instructions, and the second time, her second attempt at rebuilding it, she wound up doing a fantastic job. She even had it equalized when she had put it back together. So she was responsible for putting this together, and I drove on it, and I drive a lot of miles on the car. I drive it a lot. So it lasted 7 years with her rebuilding it. So nice job. And for new people getting involved, or young people, be confident in what you're doing, man. Give it a shot and try it, because like I said, she did a great job rebuilding this thing, and it worked out fantastic. So, but if you like the detail of this content and you want me to show you a video on how to completely rebuild the power steering control valve, let me know in the comments below. I'd be happy to put together a complete detail from start to finish on how to rebuild these, put them back together, and reinstall it in the car. So anyway, but let's get back to the meat of this. Let's get this guy installed, get the new hoses on, and it looks like it's about 75 degrees outside, and get the car out for a cruise. We're going to go ahead and put the control valve back onto the relay rod. The one thing you want to make sure is you remove the bolt, because what will happen is this bolt will bind up on the threads as you're threading this on, so be careful with that. Do a nice job lining this thing up to start the threads, because the last thing you want to do is start cross-threading these things. There you go. You'll feel them start to grab and run in. So then this thing should just run on here, no problem. If you got it cleaned up good, it'll just run all the way down until it seats. All right, we'll thread it down, and then you'll see here where it jams, it stops. What you'll do is once it jams and stops, you'll back this off half a turn. All right, and then once you get it backed off, what you can do is line this up with the pitman arm. Pitman arm's right there, and slide it in there, and then what you can do is start the castle nut on there, and we'll come back and tighten this down a little bit. Put it on there, we'll just tighten it up by hand for right now, and then we'll come back and torque it in a little bit. And then now that we have that ran up and positioned, we can go and run our bolt back in here. Tighten that up by hand right now. Nut on top of the pitman arm to the power steering control valve. I'm going to torque that down. That gets torqued down to 45 foot-pounds of torque. And then once it's torqued down to 45 pounds, you turn it just a little bit more to get the castle nut and the cotter pin to line up. So the other thing we got to tighten up is this 9/16 bolt that tightens down the power steering control valve onto the drag link. So I'll just tighten that up with a wrench, switch over to the torque wrench and torque that to spec. Okay, next up we're just going to put the power steering lines on. The first one that'll go on is the return line. It's the furthest from the back. So a little trick to putting these on, always hand tight them. Don't ever try to tighten up with a wrench. But what you do is seat the hose all the way down flat, and then bring the nut down, and then start the nut that way. And they'll usually start right on. Then once you get it straight, the line's seated down, thread started. You want to try to pull these in by, turn these in by hand as much as you can. Wiggle the line around a little bit. Okay, next up will be the extend line. You can tell the extend line is going to have the tighter loop. So the extend line is going to be the top coming off the control valve. So we'll seat that in there. And then what we'll do is put on the extend line, which is the smaller loop. We'll put that one on the bottom of the cylinder. All right, now that we got everything hand tight, what we'll do is we'll tighten them up now. You want them in a crisscross pattern with the retract coming out of the bottom and coming up over into the top. And then the extend, the short one here, is going to go back down behind it and underneath. So, and that's going to keep you away from the bracket for the cylinder. If not, what's going to happen is this hose is going to come over, hit on the bracket, and eventually rub a hole in it. So, all right, we'll go ahead and tighten them up in this position. All right, I'm going to get some power steering fluid in it. Mine's a little difficult to get at. I've got this funky alternator bracket that covers up the power steering reservoir a little bit, but nonetheless, a little tricky to get it in and out of there. Small little offset funnel and a little tricky pour all over the alternator belt. That was a good idea. I'm going to fire up the car now, and I'm going to run the steering hard to the left and then hard back to the right again a few different times. Try to get all the air bubbles and stuff out of the pump and the lines, and make sure nothing's going to leak. Well, I was hoping this wouldn't happen, but I'm going to have to even out the proportioning valve now. As you can see, if I cut the wheel all the way over to the left, it'll start to go back on its own. I'm not touching it. It's just slowly going back. So I'm going to have to pop the cap off the control valve and mess around with proportioning from left to right. So you can see by adjusting this nut counterclockwise, you can see the steering will start automatically going to the right. And then if you turn it clockwise, you'll see the steering will start moving to the left. So what I'll do is I'll even it out in the middle. So that's a neutral position. I'll put the cap back on and the steering's adjusted. I don't have any leaks, everything looks good. I've gone extended and retract, the hose is all clear. So we should be good to take it for a drive. Throw the tires back on, tighten the lug nuts up, center cap and off the jack stands. I'm gonna go ahead and get the car. And fire it up. I'm gonna back it out of the garage, and then I'm gonna have my wife drive after that. I'm gonna record. Alright, taking off. We're gonna hit some bumps, go around a couple corners, make some tight turns. Steering wheel's returning back to center, no problem. Drives nice and straight down the road. Everything's going good. No complaints at all. Hit some more bumps here just to make sure that things are going well. Another long straightaway. Car's not pulling to the left or right or anything. And back into the garage, and we're going to call that done. Alright, it was a great night to get out and cruise around for a little bit, and I really appreciate my wife going with me and driving while I videoed, so that was really good. And it was nice just to get out and cruise around with her for a little bit. So, power steering control valve is all dialed in, doesn't pull to the left or the right, no leaks, so I'm glad to get that project done and out of the way. I'm Mike, and I'll catch you next time on 33 Mile Garage.